Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast, where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for social justice and collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today.
For those new to our podcast, Interdependent Study is meant to be a space and community for folks who believe in and want to do the work of social justice.
Each week, we bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
That's right. And we want Interdependent Study to be a space we're always learning with one another. And Damien, you are up this week, well, sort of, kind of.
Sort of, kind of.
Well, yeah. So what are we doing today?
We're doing this together. We have brought an activity to the table for us to do today. We actually did this activity last month and enjoyed it. So I kind of thought it'd be fun to do it again. The activity is a box of conversational questions from a company called The Skin Deep, and they created this activity called the And the questions we've got in our gray box is from their On Racism edition. So for some context, the description on the back of the box says this: in your hands is a valuable tool for the necessary and challenging work of undoing racism. Each question in this deck will provoke introspection and investigation as you examine the ways racism has permeated our lives. We invite you to open yourself up to the uncomfortable as you explore, educate, and inform yourself and others through honest dialogue, whether solo, one-on-one, or in a group. So yeah, we're going to do this again for our episode today. What we're going to do here is we're each going to ask each other two questions from this very large deck, and each of them have a question on it, and we're going to have a conversation based off of those questions. And just like last time, we chose these independently of each other, so I have no idea what Aaron's going to ask me. He has no idea what I'm going to ask him.
Yep.
And we're going to see where it goes. So, and I'm going to declare that you start.
Okay. All right.
I don't know that I had that power, but here we are.
All right. So this card says, first of all, how dare you?
Okay.
Sorry. No, that's the wrong one. Okay.
That must be a right. That's a right. They do have some write-in questions. You wrote that in.
I did. Got him. All right. So this question is more serious than how dare you.
Good.
What's your relationship with anger, and what do you learn from it?
Wow. What's my relationship with anger? And
what do you learn from it?
What do I learn from it? Wow.
And I think in the context, like, right, this is for
about racism,
right? About racism, anti-racism.
Yeah.
What is it? I think what do you learn from it, or I think it's also interesting to talk about, like, what does it do for you?
Yeah.
Or maybe not for you, like, what does it do to you?
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Like, what does it do for you and to you as well, in the context of sort of, what we talk about here each week.
Absolutely. Well, that's good context, right? Because I was about to just pull up like I do in therapy and just start talking to you. So I'm glad you clarified.
You can also do that. I just thought I'd add a little bit more context.
I appreciate the context. I think I've been transparent about this on the podcast. Certainly you and I have talked about this. I think about, all the things that happen in our society, right? And the incidents of racism and whatnot that take place, the ways in which white supremacy rears its ugly head in our society. There are times, there are news stories, there are incidents, there are things that happen, and oftentimes those things make me very angry, right? And especially if I think about the summer of 2020, right, as an incident, right, or an issue, right, or any number of the police murders of folks who look like me or anything resembling me, right? Those incidents are triggering and infuriating and make me so angry. And there's a lot that goes along with that, right? There's a lot of, and I think I've gotten better about this as these things continue to happen, right? I have spaces like this one to process them, spaces outside of this to process them, good people in my life, family, right? I have gotten better about figuring out what to do with that anger, right? Like letting that anger rush over me, right? And letting myself acknowledge it, sit in it, do whatever it is that I need to do with it. but then also then trying to figure out okay, now what? Like what's
Yeah.
next, right? Yeah. Because sitting with it, stewing in it, isn't always healthy, right? And especially when we've talked about this too, right? When these things happen, when it's atrocity after atrocity, some of those days in there, it was multiple things in a single day, right? Or in a week. And it can get exhausting, but that's not healthy to sit in and stew in it. So, in the context of this, it's really trying to, I think what I've gotten better about doing is firstly acknowledging it, naming it, talking about it with the people that I feel safe and comfortable talking about it with, and then trying to figure out what the healthy thing is to do next, right? Like whether or not that's supporting the causes, the people, the organizations that are doing work to address that issue or that incident, right? Or rally us together, whether or not that's amplifying it in my circles, right? And making sure folks know about it. But I think the biggest thing that I would share is, and I hope this is helpful for other people too, is just this idea of how important it is to take care of yourself, right? And take care of the people you love in the midst of that, who are experiencing the same kind of anger. And that's, I think, been really important to me as someone who is naturally an emotional person, can have emotional reactions, and seeks to take care of others, and wants to do that, right? Yeah. Making sure that folks feel that they also can come to me and have a space to process their anger too. So yeah, I think, and then we've also talked about this, there's always been incidents where there's police cam footage, right, or whatnot, right? And we have talked about this, and I got a lot better about not watching that footage anymore, right? So like making decisions like that of like I'm not going to do it. I can read the story and I can fully understand what took place, right, just by reading the story, right, or having someone I trust tell me what happened. But I don't need to see and witness that violence for myself because it's going to do more than just make me angry. I don't know if that fully answered your question. I hope it did. So. But I think it's trying to figure out and trying to be better about the naming and acknowledging it, and the figuring out what I need to do to take care of myself and also help take care of others too. Yeah. All right. I like it. That was a good one. You got me right out the gate there.
I didn't know I was going first, so I thought I did.
Well, we didn't talk about it, right? That's the whole point of this. All right. So I think I have two questions here. I'm going with the one that I think is easier.
Okay.
We'll see. So the question here is, describe a time when something in the media influenced your perception of yourself. Describe a time when something in the media influenced your perception of yourself.
That's an interesting question.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah. Because I don't know, like, nothing is rushing to me right now that would, that's explicit.
Yeah.
Or like a specific time.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think about it. And yeah, I don't know. I think that there are so many ways that the media has influenced, was it the way that I see myself?
Your perception of yourself.
My perception of myself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the way I see myself.
Yeah.
My perception of myself, I think, is a lot of it is influenced by media, and it's not always obvious, and it's not always like, oh, this one thing made me do this thing, or like right, like influence the way that I do XYZ. It's lots of little influence toward whatever that behavior or characteristic might be.
Yes.
So yeah, and some of this is like media, but it's also just in the water. It's in the culture of the United States, and so it's hard to pinpoint something.
Well, it's so funny that you think about, and that you say, and you mentioned culture, because a part of me was also thinking about sort of, we both have a love for this, like music, right? And artists, right? Like the word here is media, so it's broad, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things when I thought about this question that came to mind and why I wanted to ask you was, right, we've talked about how there's lots of depictions of Black people, Black men in media, in movies and whatnot, right? And so, and we've come a long way with that, right? So there's lots of stories around how I didn't grow up often seeing myself. People don't see themselves. You haven't had that, right? You have always been.
And there's a variety of ways that, white, cis, hetero men have been portrayed. So, right, like there's heroes and villains and the full gamut.
Yes.
And so I think that's a big reason why I think I don't have anything specifically coming to mind. There's lots of things that I think influence who I am on, small levels.
Yeah.
But not necessarily something I would be like, oh, well, yeah, like this impacted me in this way because of
Right. Totally.
X, Y, Z. So yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think to add, you mentioned music,
Right.
Like I think there's music that inspired me to play music, and continues to inspire me to play music now. And so there's stuff like that I think I could talk about, but that's not necessarily based on my sort of racial identity or yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I appreciate that. All right.
Okay. So this is a good one.
I thought you were going to say, this is a write-in. Hey, we back to it. How dare you?
What's the wisest thing someone ever told you about racism? What's the wisest thing someone ever told you about racism?
Oh, man. That's a big question, right? Because I certainly understand that the question is getting at me personally, right? Like, what is the wisest thing someone has told me personally? The first thing that sort of popped in my mind was this idea of like, I feel like it's so incredible. And one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is that we get to engage with brilliant minds and brilliant people and take in their knowledge. And I think it's made me a better person. But obviously I'm not talking to, any of these people on the phone or at the dinner table. I think the one of the things that comes to mind or incidents that comes to mind is just thinking about my dad. And, I think I've shared this before, but my early childhood, like my elementary school years, but even, actually, I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to say sort of the first few like jobs I had, and listening to my dad talk about sort of what it meant to be a Black man in a professional setting and in a work setting, and talking to him and reflecting about some of the experiences I was having in some of my workplaces, right, and the things that were said to me, the things that I observed and noticed, right? And, my dad ultimately retired as the director of finance for Johns Hopkins. And so he was a big deal. And he sat in a lot of spaces with a lot of people who did not look anything like him, right? And rose up the ranks, dealing with a lot of people who didn't look like him. And so it was always awesome to sit and sort of take in his wisdom around what it meant to and what I should do when I show up to spaces and the ways in which I needed to show up to work and the ways I needed to present myself and the ways in which I needed to work and work hard, right? And work harder than others. And in some ways that's all, and any person of color, anyone with a marginalized identity will tell you that sucks, right? And there's a lot that goes along with that. But I appreciated the way in which, and I know he did this for my brother too, right? Like the ways in which he sort of talked about those those experiences, shared those lessons with us, encouraged us, right? And encouraged us to be the best versions of ourselves, right? And to bring out the natural skills that both he and I have. And so I think that has served me well, right? And in particular thinking about my work ethic and my drive, I attribute a lot of that to him, and sort of obviously role modeling myself off him in some respects, but also his lessons around, this is what it means to be a Black man working in the spaces that you're working in, right? And the ways in which you are, he also recognized that I was an educator, right? And influencing other people too. And I think he has a lot of pride in what I do, which is awesome. But also then wanting to make sure that I was showing up in the right ways and the best ways to do that work as well. So yeah, that's what comes to mind. Good old dad. Hi, Dad.
I love that.
It's me. All right. My second question for you and last question for you is, and I'm so curious about this question for you. Do you feel threatened by the term white supremacy? Why or why not?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Threatened. The short answer is no.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that maybe there was a time where probably I would feel like people talking about that was about me in particular, right? Like talking about me as an individual, or right, and the way that stuff, way that like white supremacy characteristics or culture shows up in spaces, and people naming that not as a personal. I might have heard it before, and sometimes it could still happen.
Yeah.
When I'm not present or grounded as well as I try to be. Like I think I could have taken that personally as not necessarily as a threat, but as a accusation.
Yeah.
Almost.
Right.
And I think that. I don't feel the same way. I don't feel the same threat of it as a system. I think the system poses a threat to me, actually.
Yes, good.
And I think the system poses a threat to lots of people I love. All of them. But I don't think the term is a threat to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I was curious. When I picked the question, I was curious about how you might interpret that word threatened and where you might go. And so I appreciate you talking about sort of where you were, right?
Yeah.
And, and where you are now. And
yeah. And I mean, I think about it. It makes me think a lot about how often white people, but people with sort of dominant identities will say that they're not safe, and it's just because they're not comfortable.
Yes.
And so they're so used to being comfortable that they conflate safety with comfort.
Yes.
And this feels like one of those things to me, too, that I right, like understanding that dynamic helps you understand that you're not like I'm not unsafe.
Absolutely.
I'm not threatened. Somebody's giving me feedback,
or inviting you into a conversation, right?
right?
Yeah.
And they don't do that for everybody, right? And so I think that's. I wish I could remember who I'm gonna paraphrase this from now, but thinking of feedback as a gift, because they don't have to provide you with that feedback, and often they won't provide you with that feedback and just let you continue doing whatever it was that you were doing that was problematic.
Absolutely.
And then being messy and harming other people in your life. And so particularly in this context, I think it's a lot of it is wrapped up in that sort of self-work of like, all right, this is not a life or death situation. I'm uncomfortable because I've been trained to be uncomfortable talking about race. Like, this isn't a thing that we do here. Here being broadly, like in the U.S., we don't talk openly about, right? And so that's all stuff that I've been trying to change my behavior to actively for a long time now.
Yes.
So long time in, relatively speaking, for my life.
Of course.
Not the world or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's what I think about with that question.
I like
It's a good
that.
one.
I like that. Right? Yeah, absolutely. And I love the naming and acknowledging that white supremacy does, in fact, target us all, impact us all.
It
And
does.
as you say, and you're particularly paying attention to the folks that you love, right? And you care for. We've got to take care of those folks in particular. So
Yeah, and in so many ways it'll come for all of us without us knowing about it, either to attack us or recruit us. And I think that, you have to be cognizant of that, just in general.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that. Thanks for this.
Yeah.
This is another good one. I appreciate this. And I think this is a really cool activity. So, again, it's called
absolutely.
The And from the Skin Deep. This is the On Racism edition if you want to get a copy for yourself and do this, again, one-on-one or with a partner, a trusted partner, or a small group. I think this is a really worthwhile activity. And there's lots of, I think we may have mentioned this the last time, there's lots of questions on here that are sort of really entry level to help folks sort of get into this, right? And then there's some really deep ones too. So
There's a variety.
There's a variety of questions.
Wide variety
here.
of questions.
Absolutely. All right, Aaron. Well, we're done here with this episode.
Yeah.
You're up in our next episode.
Sure am.
What are you going to bring to the table for us next time?
I'm bringing the Supreme Court.
The whole Supreme Court.
I'm going down there and I'm bringing the whole court back here for us to talk about and at.
Okay.
I thought about writing pause for laughter in the notes. But really, I'm going to bring a New York Times interactive piece called The Major Supreme Court Decisions in 2023. So we'll talk about some of the recent decisions in general, and how they impact us. And we'll probably dive into a few of those. That's what I'm bringing next time.
I'm looking forward to it. We just talked about this a little bit ago in our last episode that the Supreme Court just has been doing a lot this year, but in particular this past couple of weeks. And so there's a lot to talk about. And I'm excited for us to bring that here and talk about it and figure out, what our application of all of this is, what more work we can do, what learning we can do from this. So yeah, I'm excited. Very good.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you all for joining us today and for listening to Interdependent Study. I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life, follow us on the socials, check us out on the YouTube, and sign up for our email list to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about us. And we'll talk to you next week.